I am honored to spend some time with one of my heroes. One of the mentors in my life that's affected my life more than anybody else. And, I've told you that kind of privately, a lot of times, would say it to anybody who listened. When I was 28 years old, was working for Vivint at the time, and Blackstone came in, bought Vivint for $2 billion. And it was the first, I had got some stock in the company, and it was the first time where I got like a liquidity event. And for a guy like me, like, that was just crazy. It was like, that would never happen,
life-changing.
I just never, would hope that could happen someday, but I'd never like even dared to dream that big. And I remember going over to your house, like you were the first person that I went over to, and just to like go get advice on what to do. I'm 28 years old. Like, do I show up for work tomorrow? And you had just been through that a lot of times, and you'd actually been through it at different stages in life, similar to the stage in life that I was at. And you had just such kind of unique feedback, and it was so helpful to me at kind of that point in life. And it has been, for the last 15 years, since we met. And so I'm really honored to be able to spend some time with Scott Petersen. So a little bit about Scott. So Scott, serial entrepreneur, founder of numerous businesses, investor in, a lot of businesses. We could go into the actual numbers, but it's, a kind of active serial investor, seed investor, but also late stage, a lot of real estate holdings. One of the savviest kind of investors that I know, and I know a lot of them, and ran the entrepreneurship program at BYU for over a decade, and built kind of a top 2 in the world program, numerous awards at Entrepreneur, for their program, and kind of the, nail it and scale it curriculum, and just all the different talent that you brought in, the funds that you brought in, and organizing it. And anyway, so super honored to be with you. Grateful to call you a friend and mentor, and excited to like dig into, the gold, the good stuff.
Thanks, Casey. It's an honor to be here. You definitely are in that top 1%. No,
thank you. So let's go back to the beginning, because I know like your roots were humble. Where did the drive come from? Because you still have it. You're how old today? You're low 60s?
64.
Yeah, mid 60s, but it feels like you're 35. Like you're still driven. You still just have like this passion and this purpose and this drive. Like, where does that come from? Was it innate? Was it taught? Was it, where did this come from?
I think there are obviously, Casey, things that we're born with. They're gifts and talents, and, part of who we are. I think it comes with us. But I remember, scientifically, even so much of what we call genetics versus epigenetics, the nurture side of us. I remember when I was 10 years old, if I really wanted any spending money, I knew that I had to, go pick cherries, because what can a 10-year-old do? So during summers, we pick cherries. And then, I'm making onion rings when I'm 13 years old, about the time that you're starting to really love love girls and so forth. And then your fingernail beds are like yellow, and your hair stinks. And it's like, wow, but I got to do this because I got to make money, and it impacts the sports that I can play. And I worked with a hardware store and a grocery store. So I've worked from the time I was 10 years old.
I remember you telling me that there was a lot of like, things that you sacrificed on, that kind of like when you think about like soccer moms and kids today, I mean, like it feels like my kids are like in every sports team and every activity, and you don't want to like withhold any opportunity from them. You want to give them every opportunity to go succeed, but that just wasn't your generation. Like it was you sacrificed a lot of stuff that you would have loved to do to go work.
Yeah, I think affluence has changed things a lot, and not all for the better. As a father, and I started to experience success right away, and I remembered my roots, and I said to myself, I can't let my children grow up in such ease that they don't have to struggle and they don't have to, learn the things that will bring them the ultimate success. So I tried to help them understand that, as a matter of fact, the question came up once, Dad, are we rich? And I said, oh, no, you are not rich. Your mother and I have achieved some success, but you are not. And so, and even our kids would admit growing up that we did not let them think, that they were privileged, because in my own growing up, when I went to my dad when I was 10 years old and said, Dad, I just need $10 so that I can play football. And almost with tears in his eyes, he said, son, we just don't have it. And then I remember my wrestling coach saying, Scott, I can't have you work. I need you to be at every single practice, the whole practice. And I said, Coach, I can't do it. I really want to do this, but I got to leave practice early a couple days a week. And it prevented me from probably succeeding at the level that I would have wanted to, but we did fine. And that same drive then carries over in everything that you do. Just because you're a few inches too short or a few tenths of a second too slow, or you don't have quite this much athletic ability, it's still the drive and that inner part of you that says, I can go do this. And today, when you don't have to wrestle with, no pun intended, or to have those difficult moments, if you're not challenged, then when life does challenge you, and it will, then it kind of beats you up. But if you get challenged when you're young and you keep letting yourself get challenged and you keep allowing yourself to, to try things and experience failure, because it's on the other side of failure that you find success.
Yeah. No, I mean, then if there's like anything that would categorize, or if I could, describe you in a couple of words, one of them would just be like relentless persistence. I've seen it, with your family, I've seen it in your profession. I saw it at BYU, just kind of a dogged, kind of can do, whatever it takes mentality to go, just succeed. And I didn't kind of see you kind of peak career building those businesses, but I did kind of see the, that next chapter in your life. And it honestly, for me, I'm 40 today. I turned 40, and there was a point in my life where 40 felt old, and I looked at that and I'm like, man, like those guys are old, and I feel really young, and I feel like there's like a lot of music left to play. But I look at people like yourself, and that, I've got a list. I've got, a list of people that are young, like they're just young at heart. They're playful. They're curious. They're driven. They have, like they have goals. They have aspirations. They're adventurous. And I'm like, that's what I want to be, my whole life. I want to have that young spirit forever, that continuous learning spirit forever. And you're one of those guys on my list that, like, when I like put the list together, like, hey, how do I want to like grow up? Like, as I grow up, how do I want to age? Like at the different stages in life, how do I want to show up in those stages? And you could have like a whole list of, what does that look like? All of us, could put a list of what does 40 years old look like, or 50 years old, or 60 or 70. And there's a whole range of what that could look like. And for some people, they're their best years. It's where they make the biggest impact. That's where they have the biggest contribution. It's kind of the compounded result of years of effort and energy that you get to go reap those returns. For others, it's like a really tough time. You know what I mean? Like, those aren't like the finest moments. And yeah, I've always just kind of admired the seasons,
You know, I remember, Casey, when I was in my early 20s, and a knock came at the door, and there's this guy that was peddling goal setting, a whole program. And we didn't have the money at the time, but I had been very interested in goals to that point in my life. And I said, you know what, I'm going to invest in this. And so I paid the $400.
Which is a ton of money back then.
Yeah, it was
that's a lot of money.
In 1980.
That's like a real investment.
Yeah. But it was sort of transformative because I can still, rattle off that goal setting system and program today. And so you sort of think about, you only have one shot at this, while you're here in this mortal journey. And I think about the opportunities to be able to make the most of it at every stage of life.
Yeah.
So when I was 25, I wrote down 9 different things that I wanted to measure my life by. And then when I turned 35, I had a friend remind me, he said, Scott, when you were 18, we were sitting there chatting. You said, by the time I'm 35, I'm going to be driving a Porsche. And of course, when I turned 35, I could easily afford a Porsche, but I had no interest personally in owning a Porsche at that time. There were other things that mattered a little bit more to me, but it was still how, when thoughts formulate in your mind, the mind is so powerful that if you allow your thoughts to be what they should be, and you control the thoughts that enter into your mind, the positive nature of those thoughts, and turning away the negative energy and the negative thoughts. And then if you always are focused on sort of your superpower, and mine was sales, then you find yourself just all of a sudden starting to climb, and to climb quickly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, some interesting things. When I turned 50, I remember saying, wow, this is what I've done over the last 30 years of maturity. Now, what's in front of me for the next 30 years of maturity? Because I'm sort of saying that after 80, I might slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
But probably not. I hope not. And so I could actually quantify those things when I was 50 that mattered most. And then I started to say to myself, I have all this experience, and now I have all these resources. I need to make the next 30 years count even more, which drove me to decide to run the Center for Entrepreneurship at BYU when the invitation came.
Which was so special. I remember it was something I didn't end up going, but you helped me get enrolled. And it was like one of those things where, countless kids that I personally know, you helped them get into that program, and it, was life-changing. And most of them had a foundation of sales. That was my world. And so everybody that I was sending your way, and you always had like a love for sales. You always had a love for those guys that were willing to go hustle and create revenue, and had that persistent drive. I'm interested. Maybe you can go through and kind of talk about your story, because I think everybody it's easy to see success as like linear, and that it's just up and to the right, and that, there's no bumps in the road, and, and I know that's not you, but talk a little bit about like, how do you go from like 18 and actually believing you're going to be driving a Porsche when you're 35, which, signifies I'm going to be successful, but you had to have like this self-confidence of this belief. But then how do you translate that into a mechanism of one, creating the capital to go build on the next ventures? Like what was your journey?
So I started out, as you know, Casey, in sales, and I had, a few years of understanding that I had good communication skills, but I had no idea what sales really was. I mean, we've all seen salespeople or insurance salespeople or salespeople, selling clothes or whatever it is. But, you're so inexperienced when you're in your early 20s.
Yeah.
And so I started out selling with a company, and And I remember a friend of mine that introduced me to the company said, gosh, Scott, the cool thing about this is that, you can go out and get a couple sales by noon, and then, you can take the afternoon and go golfing. And it sounded wonderful, but actually when I got out there the very first day and I had 7 sales my first day, and I thought, wow, why would I go home after I've got 2? Why would I not just keep going and going?
And you were doing what? You were selling what at this time?
I was selling industrial products for a large corporation out of Irving, Texas.
And business to B2C?
B2B.
Was it B2B? Okay,
yeah,
so you're
B2B.
B2B.
So we called on all kinds of businesses, industrial and office buildings and otherwise. And I was the top rep in the whole company. Out of 225 in that division, I was the top in the entire company. And this was after 5 months. And I was invited to become a sales manager. And I thought, and they moved me back to Kansas City. I thought, wow, this is cool, but I've never been a sales manager. And at this particular time, it was 40 years ago, there wasn't a lot of training involved.
Yeah.
And so, I had to learn on my own. But I had somebody tell me once, and I thought about this, how did I really get, successful when I didn't really understand and know about sales? Because if you were to ask me of my technical selling skills on a scale of 1 to 10, I probably would have been 3.
Yeah.
But the thing that I had going for me is that I knew that no one could outwork me.
Yep.
And I knew that no one could build stronger and better relationships than I was willing to. And I realized that those were born on trust, on service, on making and keeping commitments. And I actually had one of my first really big companies tell me, he said, Scott, there's a problem with guys like you. He said, you're so good at these relationships and keeping your word and keeping your commitment that, we actually get sold on you and not your company. I never forgot that, that ever after that my companies needed to deserve, their business year after year after year.
How many times do you see that where you have a mediocre company with an exceptional sales force that actually like blows past a company with the superior product, but doesn't know how to go get revenue? And it's kind of a two-edged sword, because if you can sell it, but it doesn't perform well, ultimately there's no sustainability in that. But vice versa, there's a lot of incredible products or services that never found their way to market because they didn't have the right team in place to go take it to the market, to go communicate the value and to go have those relationships. And I'm jumping around a little bit, but that's always been something that I've admired so much about you, is your ability to teach. You're just kind of a gifted teacher. And I think a lot of that probably came from all those years of teaching your businesses, documenting and codifying the processes and consistency and building those out. And actually, because you were saying you didn't have any sales training, but every one of your businesses had a tremendous amount of sales training.
Yeah. And how that sort of formed in my mind was, I said to myself, all right, I've learned, the importance of work ethic. I've learned the importance of relationships. Now I do have to become a master in being a technical salesperson. I need to understand the psychology of selling. And what I really learned through that process is that the highest level of selling becomes consultative, that you would never know that sitting on the other side of you is a salesperson, but really someone who is an expert in an industry that understands the pain and problems and challenges of that industry so well that you can codify those problems, the cost of those problems, and then you can actually, it's sort of like an exchange of value. If I were to say to you, for example, Casey, listen, you're a good friend. I love you, brother. Here's $1 million. And then I said to you, oh, by the way, Casey, just give me 100,000 of that back. You'd be okay with that, wouldn't you, Casey?
Of course.
And so that's what sales is. It's an exchange of value. So it's like, I'm going to give you $1 million and I'm going to show you that it's not just fluff. This is empirical.
No, but I think that's like a very important point that you're describing. And this has been my experience with sales is, you'll have young salespeople that go out and they say, but I saved them like $2, on their bill. And they weren't saying, hey, I'll give you $1 million. They're saying, hey, I'll give you $1 million, but you got to give me back 900,097. And it's like, there's not enough like reason to switch. Like it has to be so disparate. If you want to sell to go so simple, zero like hold up, zero restrictions, no friction, create 10 times the value. If there's a lot of friction and hangups and objections, it's because that gap between value and switching cost isn't very big. And that's not a great spot to be in.
It's a terrible spot. In fact, it puts you in a spot of being a salesman.
Pushy.
And instead of the person that is the consultant, that I'm here to give you so much value that we're going to become amazing friends because I'm going to transform your business. Anyway, everything I learned, I started codifying and putting in manuals and then I would write manuals for every single business that I had. I developed a manual that talked about everything from, wording and how we greet and meet people, introduce ourselves, how we qualify buyers, how we how we go through the whole process of doing a needs audit or a needs analysis, or asking discovery questions, or all of these things that then lead to presenting value propositions, unique value propositions that are tied to a return on investment. And anyway, by doing it this way, then you have a whole sales force doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Instead of having 100 people out there doing their own deal, you have 100 people out there who have a playbook.
You can systematize it. You can have it be sustainable. Yep. So you did that. Mm-hmm. You're obviously wildly successful in it. And, I think, when you were telling me this story when we were younger, work had so much to do with it. You just worked way harder than everybody else. It wasn't that you were more talented or, more charismatic. Ultimately, it came down to you were working 2 to 3 to 5 times as hard as kind of the average person, that when they were going and selling one and shutting it down for the day, you were starting at a certain time and ending at a certain time. And ultimately, like, that created some tremendous opportunities for you.
Yeah, I had an old friend that told me, he said, Scott, if you'll work for 5 to 7 years the way that nobody else will, you'll live the rest of your life like nobody else can. And I know that he didn't coin that phrase. He learned it from somebody else.
Yeah.
But, what a true statement is that, I never thought about, how much money my employer was making. I never got involved in the politics of companies. I just simply kept my nose clean. And when I had a job to do, I made sure that nobody else outperformed me.
You kind of became like irreplaceable for the company. I mean, when you're that type of, I remember reading Cal Ripken's book when I was younger, and he talked about this philosophy, and obviously Cal Ripken, he played more, consecutive games than anybody in the history of baseball. But he talked about this philosophy, he talked about this philosophy when he was a young player. And he just said, I know that the day is going to come where I go into a batting slump and I'm, the worst player on the team. And I want, when that day comes, that I go take ground balls with the new shortstop every single time, and that I'm that guy in the locker room that everybody likes, and I'm adding value every different way. I want it to be so hard for that manager to be able to not have me on the field because of all of the value that I bring to the team outside of my performance. And that was just his philosophy. And he ended up playing more games than anybody else, consecutive games. But he had kind of this mentality of like, I want to create so much value that I'm completely irreplaceable. And I've seen, I could name guys in my career that came into an organization. There's a guy named Scott Hardy that was one of those guys. He's real successful, CEO now. I think company up in Logan. You remember? You know Scott?
I do. I know who he is.
I
trying to
can't
remember.
Convergys.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, he kind of came in a pretty junior role, at Vivint. He's an extremely talented guy. He was an HBS guy, did, consulting, but he just produced value. He was no drama in an environment where there was always some drama, and somehow he just wasn't in it. And he just created value, and he kind of went from place to place to place. And ultimately, he was kind of next in line to go run Vivint at one point, and ended up, taking a really good opportunity outside of it. But there's just people in every organization, and, you've always kind of been that person, but you didn't work for other companies too long.
No, my first company, I was there for about 3 years, and then I spent 4 years with a medical company where I became the national sales manager, and then a vice president and general manager.
Yep.
And then I started my own business. But what was interesting is how you stack skills. And so you learn first, okay, I've got this skill in opening up sales territories. So I know that I'm not going to starve. Even if I fail, at a business,
yep,
I'll just go get reemployed, and I'll go,
It gave you that confidence.
Yeah. And there's I was 29, you got a house payment, you got 2 car payments, you've got, to provide for your family, and you can't not have that income. But I thought to myself, if I can do it for other people, I've learned to sell. Now I've learned to manage teams. I've learned to manage the leaders of teams.
Yeah.
And I've learned about the P&L statements, and I've learned about inventory, and I've learned about operations and marketing, and all the different aspects of running a company. I can do this myself. Yeah. And so I had a partner that was better on the operations side, more experienced, a lot older than me, by the way. And I took on the whole sales side, and we just built a nice company together.
Which company was that, and what did you do?
Life and safety products. We were medical and safety products for business and industry.
Okay.
And after growing that for 9 years, then we sold our company to Cintas, the uniform people.
Yep.
Back in the middle 90s.
And it was good outcome, right? Kind of
absolutely
$10+ million exit.
We had
it was a
significant
at a
exit.
young age. You're how old at that point?
Middle 30s.
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is really interesting because the difference between being a one-hit wonder and being somebody that just recreates themselves. And I think that's always been something that I've admired about you, is you've always just kind of found a way to go recreate yourself in those different chapters. But I know that one was hard for you, where you kind of had this point where you're playing golf every day and just being I'm not fulfilled. This isn't this isn't, I've got the house and I've got the stuff, but it's not getting all of me. I'm not.
It was sort of I was out there on the course one day, and I'd taken the summer off after I sold the business, trying to figure out what's next. And it was almost an inner voice saying, you're wasting your time.
But you told me it wasn't, you're describing it kind of casual, but that was a really spiritual moment, wasn't it?
It was a big moment. It was a big moment, which I acted on immediately. I actually quit the club. It was one of the top 100 courses in America. And I got to work, and that's where I actually took sort of a sabbatical out of my career. And I actually did quite a bit of researching and then writing for about 3 years. But in the middle of that, I started a new company, and I realized that as much experience as I had had in selling and building my first company, that I didn't know a lot yet.
That's so interesting, because I think pride would tell you I've done it. I know everything. The pride side of you. It's tough to stay humble when everybody's telling you you're awesome.
When you run out of, in that second business, we ran out of money 5 times, and I was giving a presentation pitch to what was called the Bi-State Investment Group of Kansas and Missouri. It was an angel group, and after one of my partners said, "Scott, were you nervous?" And I said, "Are you kidding? I never get nervous in front of crowds." "Scott, I think you were nervous." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "No, your hands were shaking." I said, "No, I'm not Anyway, I held out my hand and said, see, it's not shaking. I was shaking like crazy. I thought, man, I am freaked out. This running out of money 5 times is, had an effect. I went to my doctor. He said, just that, you're freaked out. So I started on an exercise program like no other. And that solved the problem. And of course, we then raised the money and built the company and had an exit, a nice exit again.
That company was what?
That company was APU Solutions. So we brought together the supply chain of the property casualty insurance companies, the collision repair shops, and the salvage recyclers to bring efficiencies for insurance companies to obtain recycled parts to repair vehicles for the insurance industry.
It's incredible, like the diversity of the businesses.
Well, it's sort of like, I didn't want to be that guy that, got paid a lot of money and then I go back and compete with them
directly into that same industry
and say, the heck with you guys. I never felt right.
Yeah. I always had like that exact same feeling. Like I worked in, the door-to-door industry and, worked at Apex and ended up being Vivint and would see all my friends jump to every different company. And, it just wasn't me. Like I wanted to, build something great, but I also when you spend so much time in one industry, you just get really specialized. You get a really specialized, powerful skill set. And the byproduct of that is I, worked with 100,000 plus individuals over, 15 years. And the ones who are really, really good, it's very hard for them not to stay in the same industry. You've got 10,000 hours in this one thing, and to go restart somewhere else, one, it's scary, and two, it's, but I always, had this desire that I'm like, I don't want to go compete against my friends. Like, I don't want to, go hang a shingle next door and go burn the building down and go destroy value in something that I created. And one of, when I think about my career, one of the things that I'm the most proud of or the most grateful for was that I was able to transition and ride off into the sunset, and that I was able to cheer for all of my friends that I'd worked with for so long and, celebrate their successes, but not compete with them, to be able to just celebrate them. And so I can resonate with kind of that feeling that you had of you sell a business and now it's like actually if you were to start that business a second time, how easy would it be the second time? You just
so much
stand
easier.
It right up. You've made all the mistakes, but the discipline of saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go, pivot. I'm going to go take these skills and go do them somewhere else.
Yeah, no, that's the fun part about doing different kinds of businesses. I guess in all on my own, just my own, I've done 8 different ventures, but
started them, founded the companies,
founded the companies or co-founded the companies. Yep. And so since they're all disparate, from a vinyl fence company to insurance companies and then other tech companies.
So talk to me about those 8 though, because everybody, when people go to Vegas, they talk about the winnings. Very rarely do they talk about the losses. When you look at those 8, is it all stars and rainbows? Is it all did they all end exactly how you want them to end? Were there any that were like, this one just didn't do what I thought it would do?
All but one. And I probably learned the most from the one that didn't perform as well as I hoped it would knew it could.
Which one was that one?
Omadi. So
I actually invested in that one.
Yeah. a great tech company. We got off to a super fast start. We had a very good product. Unfortunately, not being as much of a tech guy as I needed to be, I trusted my tech co-founder too much on how he built the stack and its architecture and its scalability. And so while it was perfect for, when we only had 100 companies, when we started to get a lot more companies, we started breaking.
Yeah.
And then by then, I had actually, raised the capital, and then I'd gone back to run the Center for Entrepreneurship to finish the job that I started, because I wanted to finish that in the way that I wanted to. And so I brought in somebody that I thought would do a good job, and it turns out that, that it just wasn't what I had hoped. And I wasn't in a position to be able to control the company like when I was running the company. And so if I had any regrets, it's that I didn't stay and get that job finished.
No,
as well.
I think that's like an interesting point, and actually like a very good point from an investment standpoint, is what I've seen. This is my experience with investing, that so much of my success has to do with the founder and the founding team, because that initial strategy just ends up being wrong most of the time. And that initial thesis ends up like, you're not even in that business 2 or 3 years from now. Like, it's the pivot and the pivot and the pivot and staying alive and having enough cash to stay alive to actually find that right product market fit to be able to go take the market. And I think, what you're describing in your second business was a lot of pivots and a lot of pain to get to the point where you found that fit and just kind of that dogged determination to go stay after it until the job got done.
Yeah. And that's the difference between, say, a known business and, like, for example, when we, a partner and I did the vinyl fence company, and we built the largest vinyl fence company in the country, and we sold it to a private equity group, had a nice outcome. And that was a business that you could know. For example, you knew what the product was.
It was just so straightforward.
You knew how to differentiate yourself. Then it was about execution. It was about
those businesses are beautiful businesses. Like when you really step back, you're like, those are great businesses.
Yeah, and it was a great business. Yeah. It was a lot of fun, and we had a good run. But when we do a technology company, like, for example, Amati, that's a real entrepreneurial endeavor, meaning that I don't have the answer from the outset as to what is product market fit.
Yep.
And, I think that we had found product fit, and I think we had found a market fit. What we unfortunately hadn't found was our product was built on the wrong stack. It wasn't scalable. And then, the team went off and started chasing things, chasing new verticals and bigger companies. And we probably could have done those businesses if we first had
taken care of number one,
taken care of where we were at, because we knew we had, when people were offering us 3 or 4 times the going rate to get an exclusive, which we didn't give, that we had something that people wanted, but they obviously wanted it to work. And when it broke, and when the app breaks down and you're out on the job,
kind of doesn't matter what it is. Yeah, you quit it. You quit it. You can't not have it work.
Creates the customer churn. But I will say, out of that adversity, it taught me more than all of my other companies combined.
Yeah.
So I learned, for example, that in a startup, there is order and sequence. And so I would start with early stage product development roadmaps, which would then lead me into how do I implement a customer professionally and perfectly so I deliver the customer happiness that they were sold.
Yep.
And then how can I keep that with my client success team, continue the gift that keeps on giving of, a product that keeps outperforming and keeps over-delivering on expectations. And then once I've gotten there, I can really spend a lot of money in marketing, and I can, do my brand, and I can do my website, and I can do my building my audience and my ad spend. I can really, look at how to do the marketing side. And then I know how to spin up these sales teams and to lead these sales teams. And then I know how to lead these sales teams. And so there's, as I said, this order and this sequence with startups that I learned actually.
Well, and so I think that'll lead me to the kind of next question is, like, talk to me about Rev Road, and talk to me, about how you're taking kind of, obviously, I'm an investor in Rev Road, and I think, for me, I don't know too many people there, but I know you're there, and that's ultimately like why I invested, was because you were there. But as I've learned about it, the concept, kind of that incubator concept of taking that knowledge and basically saying, we're going to go provide resources to these young companies and help them get product market fit and help them kind of have some capital constraints and targets to make the capital those early dollars, make them efficient, to not just burn through them like so many companies do. And, I think you guys are building something really special. So talk to me about kind of what that is and.
So thanks, Casey. And thanks for being an investor.
Of course.
I love being invested with you, and I love the reciprocal. The idea, sort of, when our partner, Darren Hill, a wonderful human being, actually, invited me to join him, it was along the lines of what I was trying to do at Brigham Young, with the entrepreneurship program. Historically, 8 or 9 out of 10 companies fail. And I always thought to myself, wow, and these are venture-backed companies. That's a challenge. That's a
big
problem.
Number. It's a big number.
That means that, if you had $50 million of Series A businesses, that as much as 45 million of those initial
going
investments
to zero.
went the way of all good things. And it's not just the loss to the investors, which is a terrible and inefficient way of capital use, but also it means that 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs had bad experiences.
Yeah, well, and I think like when you like take it a step further, that entrepreneur isn't wealthy.
Right.
For the most part. That entrepreneur is like mortgaging their house, and they're like not taking a salary, and they're putting it all on the line. And those entrepreneurs have teams, and they've got companies. And so like you think about like, it's so much more than how that VC lost a little bit of money in that deal. Like it's human lives. And I think that's where like the spiritual component comes in, that there's this, the Tony Robbins philosophy of like business is a spiritual game.
Yeah. And he's absolutely right when he says that. And I think it's the greatest form of charity. And I've said this to my partners many times, because I can give someone a pair of shoes. I can feed them for a month, but ultimately that money runs out. If I can help them to understand how to create their own enterprise in a cost efficient way, then I've given them so much more than just a pair of shoes. So think of it this way. If companies don't fail then because they don't have enough money, because 9 out of 10 obviously failed and they had a lot of money. I mean, who would think that if somebody wrote you a $5 million check that you couldn't go out and start a business on that?
Yep.
But in fact, 9 out of 10 of them falter. And so companies fail not because they don't have enough money, but because they don't have enough know-how. And because very few, almost none, of our early stage CEOs have all the skill set that they need in order to flourish.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do at Rev Road Capital, is to find good early stage companies that we think have found product market fit, but knowing they probably haven't perfectly found it yet, because they're still early stage. So we want to be there not to drive the car in any way, shape, or form. We have no interest whatsoever in helping them run their company. But isn't it great, when you're traveling to a new place that you've never been before, even when you've got iPhones like we have today, that you've got a navigator sitting in the other seat, someone that's opened it up, and can alert you, down the road. So that's what we're trying to be, is at crucial points, they know that they've got somebody that they can go to, and that we're not just going to use words and cliches. We're actually going to get dirty, And
you have a team that's like all had successful exits and have actually like very diverse business experience, which I think is like one of the things that I admired, is that you haven't all done it in one particular industry. You've got tech, and you've got, kind of more EBITDA based, industrial type companies, and you've got software companies, and you have just kind of a group of advisors that has like real value add, like real life experience.
Yeah. It's like, I'm sort of like the early stage guy in our firm. And then, my partner, David, he's like the guy that, was not only a serial entrepreneur, but then he worked for Amazon, headed up a big division there, working directly for Andy Jassy. And So we learned about
So he's got like legit operating chops.
Chops and mechanisms and building high performance teams and so forth. And our partner Rochelle is just like the consummate relationship person, perhaps one of the best I've ever worked with. And yet she's managed, wealth of some of the biggest families at her time with Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan and so forth, and so we have the experience to really help these teams. We have the capital to help these teams. We have the relationships to help these teams. And so, I was living back in Kansas City for 20 years of my career. I knew Ewing Kauffman, who used to own the Royals before he passed.
Yep.
And when he and his wife Muriel passed, they set up a big foundation, I think with about $2 billion that it's a think tank in entrepreneurship called the Kauffman Foundation. And it's the foremost think tank in entrepreneurship in the world.
Wow.
So a friend of mine who is the CEO of what's called the Kauffman Fellows Foundation, they did a big study. And they found that that there was a direct correlation between the global domestic product and what they called the global entrepreneurial index, and
across countries.
Yeah, across all countries. And they found that if they could raise the level of the GEI, or the global entrepreneurial index, by 10%, that they could raise the global GDP by $23 trillion. And so at the time, that's exactly what the U.S. GDP, our GDP right now currently is about 27 trillion, I think, which is roughly a third, just less than a third of the total global GDP.
In the world, yeah.
And so if you added an additional, 25 trillion, we'll say, to the to the global GDP, we could feed the world. And that's why it actually is what Tony Robbins said, a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
That we can get serious about, just like we've developed and perfected the way that we think about running large corporations, being, significant operators and so forth. If we can do the same thing with the early stage, where we can make it not such a mystery, and have less failures and more capital efficient, then we have the opportunity to be able to change the world.
No,
in
and
a quite remarkable
I've
way.
always kind of, I had a chance and still have a chance. You helped me teach at BYU, and part of teaching at BYU is being a student at BYU. I get to sit in those classes and listen to Corbin and, yourself and different people teach these concepts. And the one that, always comes back to me is that kind of concept of ideation, of, just dreaming up, dreaming as big as you can dream, and not having any limits to, there's no stupid idea, and just like letting it flow, but then also kind of taking these ideas and validating them. And I think just the general business philosophy is wrong. It's backwards. You go get an idea, you build a business plan, you go raise capital, and then you go see if it works. And that's, you think about how much capital has just been like, take behind the house and burn it with a dumpster. You know what I mean? Like put gas on it and just burn it, just from following that sequence, versus kind of what you teach, which is you ideate, you get a minimum viable product, you go validate it. You're patient, you're patient with profit, you're patient with profit, or you're patient with growth, impatient with profits, until you go find that product market fit. And that's when the capital comes in, and you go get impatient with growth and patient with profits. You go get the market.
We were the first university in the entire world to adopt lock, stock, and barrel, the lean startup. So Steve Blank wrote the book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, but then one of his sort of proteges, Nathan Furr, with Paul Ahlstrom, a really wonderful local entrepreneur and VC, they co-authored a book called Nail It, Then Scale It. And so when I came to BYU and I met Nathan and read his book as well, I said, well, what are they teaching actually here at BYU? And he said, Scott, it's it's not what it should be. And that's the kind way of saying it. So I told the dean, I said, I'll come, but you got to let me have some
in the curriculum.
You got to let me have some control over the curriculum. So this never happens at university, but I promise you in like 90 days, we changed the whole curriculum of the entrepreneurship program. And we adopted the lean startup. And some people warned me and say, Scott, this could be a fad. I said, I've already done.
You've just done it.
5 businesses. You just
know. Yep.
And he's absolutely right. And I am totally confident this is no fad. This is the way that it's going. And we even set up a competition called the International Business Model Competition. It started with 6 universities and actually invited Steve Blank and Alex Osterwalder and Nathan Furr and Paul Ostrom and others to be the early judges of this competition. And we ended up 10 years later with 600 universities and about 5,000 teams in 38 countries that were participating. So it was actually a very big deal teaching all of these countries the lean startup.
Yeah.
And so what it did is it propelled Brigham Young's program from, a place of obscurity to a place of global dominance.
Yep.
And the last 5 years that we were there, in 2020, our student teams had exited with $13.5 billion.
But I just don't think you're ever going to fully know the impact of that change because you take kind of this Silicon Slopes ecosystem and you've got UVU that has, like a vibrant, entrepreneurial, energy. And then you take BYU that has the same entrepreneurial energy and University of Utah and all these students that are kind of coming here and you take these ingredients and then you take, these companies that you're talking about that have built companies and exited and that cycle ends up being virtuous. You know what I mean? Like it ends up just feeding on itself. That capital kind of recycles and comes in and it just, you wonder what it's going to look like 10 years from now or 20 years from now from like those seeds that you planted.
It is actually a virtuous cycle. When I joined the entrepreneurship program as an advisor and donor, it was in the middle to late 90s.
Yep.
And the center director, Don Livingstone, a wonderful friend and human, he had coined a phrase which he kind of adopted from several different things to learn, earn, and return. And that was the idea that we were going to help these young teams, which included Josh James and John Pastana in Omniture, who really, after WordPerfect and Novell, were the sort of second wave of Utah dominance
they led that charge
in the tech scene. And they came out of that program, and the founders or those donors were their mentors, and they were their early capital.
Yeah.
And so when you look at this virtuous cycle, and you can see what they've done since with the building of Domo and Observe Point and the building of Silicon Slopes, you're exactly right. And that's what I think people like Tony Robbins and many others that have enjoyed a successful journey have found that the real joy is giving back. It's that second part of your career where you've had a chance to kind of be able to make your own way in the world, but now you need to be a guide to help as many people as possible to make their way in the world.
Well, I think all of us, we're looking for meaning. I think it's like so natural for all of us to want to find, meaning in what we do and contribution. And I think having that philosophy is just such a productive philosophy of saying, there's different seasons of my life. There's the sowing, there's the spring, there's the summer where you're just killing yourself. And then there's like seasons of reaping where it just feels like you get to, enjoy the benefits of work you've done for a long time. But then you have this kind of additional season, this winter season that can either be like really painful or it can really be enjoyable based on the decisions that you made in those earlier seasons. And I think about like what you're describing of kind of this time in your life where you can be a mentor, where you can be a guide. Like you're not going to go operate. You're not going to go found that startup and go work for 60 hours a week for 5, like you've done that. You've done, but you can like be there for those young leaders, and you did that at BYU and you're doing that at, Rev Road and obviously, and, all the other kind of things you're touching in, church and community and things like that. But it's just, I think about the people who've influenced me in my life. A lot of them, I've never met them, or met them a few times. It's the Stephen Coveys, it's the Clayton Christensen's, it's the, the Tony Robbins, it's the Dale Carnegies. It's kind of these people that were able to document their stories and were able to, teach in a way that was simple, for my simple brain to go understand. And I think about kind of the legacy that you've left and are leaving, and it's just really special. So, I kind of honor you for what you have done and are doing, because I think it's going back to that business is a spiritual game, and you've got to be so proud of those contributions,
Something that's so important, Casey, you and I were video conferencing a week ago, and you were out at Harvard, and I could see that, you had your shirt off and you were working your guts out. You were doing stairs and you were doing all these different things. And it reminded me, something so important. My health has always been important to me along the journey. So I've always worked out with running and weights and different sports, because you can have resources, but if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And I once had a group of, I'm part of this sort of mastermind group called Aspire, and there's about 20 of us you should join it, by the way, Casey.
Sign me up.
Of high net worth people in the Valley, all of whom you probably know. And we meet like on a quarterly, or at least a quarterly basis, usually every 6 weeks or so. And we talk about what's going on in the world and the world of investing and the world in generally. They asked me many years ago to give a presentation to the group on how I measure success.
Yeah.
And we have people, from all across the spectrum, in that group of, people that are faith-based or not faith-based, or, wildly successful people that, that are like at high 9 or 10 figures, of net worth. And, and yet it was really popular, that presentation. And I think it's the way I'm trying to close out the last 30 years of my life, is that, the things that are most important to me, stem from my faith, relationships like my wife and my children and their success, and being able to give back and to be able to help the rising generation figure things out, and to be able to have the, finally, last of everything that's important to me is this wealth, this stuff. It's the least of everything, that is important to me, and yet it's also helpful to be able to achieve some of the other dreams that you have of giving back and of helping other people, and of being able to, say, travel and to have new experiences with your family.
And we're bouncing around, but I want to touch on this subject because it's an important subject. And I think, money in particular, that people have different triggers with money. And a lot of it has to do with how they were raised or what they were taught or whatever. And, don't have very productive beliefs on what money is. And I obviously have my opinions on, what it is and what it's for. But talk to me a little bit about that, because you've always kind of lived a beautiful life. You've experienced kind of the good things in life. You haven't been a pauper, and you haven't, you've taken that resource and you've both invested. You're as active as an investor as anybody I've ever met, but also you've invested in yourself and your family and in experiences, and you still do, and you kind of bundle those together, and also giving. You've given a tremendous amount of money to different causes and contributions that you're passionate or you care about. Talk to me a little bit about money and what it is and what it signifies, and kind of how you see money and like what your relationship's been with it, because I think it's important.
Yeah, no, I actually think it's important in significant ways. When I was at the program at BYU, I got to a place where we had created a lot of multi-millionaires, even a number of 100 millionaires and so forth, and then sometimes the response to that money wasn't exactly what I hoped. And because money has never been a big driver for me, other than that it's a tool.
Yeah.
And it can be a valuable tool, but it pales in comparison to having a conversation like I did this past Saturday with my son and his son, and they were sharing a personal experience. And this 8-year-old boy is like amazing. He's the best soccer player on his team. He had his first year in football and had a couple pick sixes, and is just and yet inside there's this tender young man who cares about the world and other people and and about his family. And I thought, this is what joy is. This is what is, really matters. And so, you can't have enough houses, or you can't buy enough cars, or you can't, buy enough planes, to have, they'll never add to your happiness, but they do add complexity to your world, because you have to manage all these resources. And that is a little bit more stressful than people might think. It's a first world problem, to be sure, but it's one that's challenging for many because they don't learn how to figure out, this relationship with their spouse, or this relationship with their children, or this relationship with their grandchildren. And to me, those are the things that provide this lasting peace and this lasting joy. But if you don't have resources, there's a lot of things that, are harder to do, not impossible, but harder to do. And so I don't think that it's, non-virtuous, for example, to go after and I obviously feel this way, to work hard and to reap the benefits from that, and to be able to have those resources. But I also think, by the same token, that it's important to learn how to manage those resources and not let them manage you. So
I've heard it said, and I believe this to my core, that money is a magnifier, and that it makes you more of what you are. And if you have a desire to go kind of change the world, it'll give you that platform. It magnifies your ability to go do that. And vice versa. If you have some vices, or if you have some different, things, it actually gives you more permission to do those on a bigger scale. And, that's been my experience with it, is that I've seen people go both ways, but it doesn't have anything to do with the money. It has to do with kind of decisions and philosophies that they've adopted earlier in their life that they just haven't been able to actualize in real life yet, because they haven't had the resources.
Right. And it's like when we, for 30 years, I've been involved in micro lending.
Yeah.
Over in the Philippines, and really all over the world, in 20 different countries probably. And we would teach these people how to start micro businesses so they could take care of their families and so forth. And one of the things that we sort of lived by was, we need to teach these people good principles of honesty and integrity and character in running businesses, that if you buy something on credit, you pay for it. And if you get a loan, you pay it back. And if you tell a customer you're going to do this, then you go do that for them. Because, as the founder of that, Menlo Smith, used to say, we're not trying to make knaves. He used the word Knaves, knaves. We're not trying to make them richer knaves. We're trying to build people of character.
Yeah.
And so I thought of that on the grander scale of, things we experience here in our country, that, we're trying to become people of real character, of real meaning, and that allow us to be able to change this world where it's so divisive, and make it a world that has greater love and peace.
It's so great. Scott, I appreciate you coming and spending time. It's an honor of mine can't wait to go share this, share kind of this conversation with the world, and look forward to doing it again. So anyway, thanks for who you are kind of as a man and as a mentor of mine. And then second, thanks for coming in and chatting today. Love you, brother.
Love you too, brother. Thanks, JC. Been an honor.